peaceful and beautiful and physical and angry all at the same time.
Were you idiot, your mind would cave in and your heart would explode within your chest.
This is going to be a shame.
Here we go!
What's happening, everybody? Welcome inside a brand new edition of the Tall Can Audio Podcast. We are on social media at Tall Can Audio. Would love to hear from you over there, and make sure you're subscribed if you're new here. My name is Matt Robinson, coming to you from the TCA studio here in the nation's capital. And over the course of today's episode, we are going to be touching on all kinds of different areas of the country, but we start in southwestern Ontario, where we meet up with our friend, host of the All 60 CHL Podcast, Steve McLean. What's happening, buddy?
Oh, Matt, it's great to be back on the show. How are things up in beautiful Bytown, Canada?
Beautiful Bytown, Canada. They are kind of beautiful here at this point, although, people not loving the fact that the 67s out of the playoffs, that was a bit of a streak they had going that has come to an end. But Gatineau will still represent the area, so I think people are doing all right. Some of us here in this studio looking forward to what's coming up starting on Friday for the Oshawa Generals. No doubt we'll get into that. What about down there, man? You are hosting this new podcast. We made contact with you through the OHL Fanboys podcast, and yes. That obviously is no longer your focus and what you're doing. You have moved on. You have expanded to the All 60 CHL Podcast. Tell us about that show, man.
Yeah, it took maybe bit off a little bit more than I could chew on that one. But the OHL Fanboys was fun. My friend Brian Thompson and I did that for 5 years, and we really we did. I don't want to say we did everything we could with it, but we got to the point where we would have a different guest on every week, much like you do. But we were trying not to ever do repeat guests, and by after 5 years of that, you start going, oh man, I got to find. You start talking to like the marketing people of some teams, and you go they're not very good at interviews, and you end up going, what am I doing here? But we got to interview all the league commissioners, and I got to do the media credential thing for a couple Memorial Cups. That was fun, but we got burnt out with it, and at the end of the 18-19 season we ended the show, and I was kind of fine without doing a podcast for a few years there, and especially through COVID. I wouldn't imagine how to try and keep one going through that like you did, but I got the itch about a year ago to start doing this again. And thankfully, even though I had experience doing a pod before, you were a big help actually in that, because I asked a lot of things that I could improve on as far as the technical side of things goes with mics and how to record, and you were great with that. But
that's only because I had plenty of opportunity to fall on my face trying it myself first and figure out, that part doesn't work. Let's try something else.
Exactly. Like, you don't want to put out a show that sounds like crap, right? So that was the number one thing for me. Okay, I can get that done. Then it was obviously about what's my angle this time. I couldn't just do OHL Fanboys again. Brian didn't want any part of doing a new podcast, and I was fine with that. And I didn't want it to be just me talking into a mic. I felt that was boring. So my thing was, let's do the entire CHL this time, because other OHL podcasts have popped back up, and I don't want to step on their toes entirely. And I found there really was no podcast talking about all of junior. There used to be that one on Sportsnet that was called Junior, but they're really there to talk about prospects and prospects only, right? Sure. So whereas I want to get into what's actually going on in the league. So I came up with the idea of having a correspondent for each of the three leagues, and here we are, all 60 a CHL podcast. I also incorporate my travels into it with my friend of mine, Kevin Jordan, who has the website OHLArenaGuide.com, and he has a corresponding one for the Q and the Dub as well. And we've been traveling along. We've been finishing all 60, and I have my three league correspondents, Patrick McNeil in the Q, Ryan Schweitzer out in the Dub, and Steve Clark in the OHL. And they've been the guys to carry me all season, especially those Q and Dub episodes when I don't get to watch as much as those.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see the growth of it, right? Like it was sort of you obviously had a little bit of an audience already from the OHL Fanboys, and then those guys have a little bit of credibility, from their own leagues, and you kind of put this thing together. I've caught a few episodes of it. I make no bones about the fact that I am not a junior hockey expert in any sense of the word. If anybody who caught our Monday show where Rob and I were taking stabs at the three-letter codes in the queue will certainly be able to vouch for the fact that we don't know a whole lot. But it's been interesting to hear how it's come together, and it seems like there's some some pretty cool chemistry there. Like, you're almost a full season into this now. The playoffs are beginning. Has it sort of gone the way you'd hoped? Have you been happy with how it started out here?
Yeah, I have to say it's been all right. We had to take about a 1 month hiatus just because of some things going on in the personal life, and the podcast had to take a back seat throughout January and February. But other than that, things have been going good. We kind of cycle through the guys, so you only hear from one guy each once every 3 weeks, and you kind of let some stories build up, and then you get to it when you get to that guy every 3 weeks. But now that the playoffs are here, we're really ramping things up. We're going to talk to each guy each week and put out more episodes, maybe slightly shorter ones as we talk what's going on. Just got done putting out all of the playoff preview shows, and we take our stab at predictions, which I tried to go off the board on a couple ones just to not be boring, but yeah, it's been good. I tried doing the whole listener feedback thing early on in the series, and found that people, and you know what, I'm just as guilty of it as anything. I remember people know I listen to Tall Can Audio, and you would say, hey, leave your comments, leave your things. And I'll be listening to a show and think, oh, I should leave a comment, but I'm busy because I'm usually driving while listening to you. And then afterwards you go, I totally forgot. Yep. So listener feedback can be a little bit hard. I kind of dropped that. But maybe if, people want to, leave their feedback, I'm all for it. And we'll get back to that at some point.
It's tough, right? And I remember, when I studied radio, I don't remember exactly how far into the program we were. It doesn't really matter. But they told it, like, in radio and podcasting, especially in an all audio format, isn't a whole lot different. But they said, don't expect to hear ever from more than, they had at the time done a study, it said about 8% of your audience, right? Like, most people just are listening passively while they're out for a run or going for a drive or at work. Like, maybe they're only half listening to what you're saying. Whatever else is good. They're at the gym, could be anything. And most people are just in like it's not even a personality thing, but they're not all that interested in interacting. They just want to hear what you have to say and carry on with their day. And so, yeah, it can be tough when you're getting a new show up and going to get people to engage and jump on board. And, I've battled with this for a very long time on TCA with, our social media. I'm not good at social media. And and so it's one of those things like, what do we do to drive a little more engagement? But at the end of the day, as long as the downloads are coming and the listening is going up, you're just sort of like, well, I'm not going to hold it against anybody. And I've always sort of kept that number, though, in the back of my head that's just like, yeah, most people, the overwhelming majority, will never interact with you, never send in their questions, never whatever. And so you value those who are just there to listen. You value those who want to interact. There's a different way to take this down, and whatever works is what works. But as long as people are listening, who really cares, right? So,
yeah, I think I overhyped myself with the listener feedback, because one of my favorite podcasts, of course, other than Tall Can Audio, is a wrestling podcast called Solid Monster Sounds Off.
Yeah, I've heard him. Yeah.
That's why I love when you bring in the wrestling. That's the weird thing. I'm not an MMA guy at all. Whenever you have the MMA stuff, I tune out.
Yeah.
But the wrestling stuff, I'm all here for. And unfortunately, the people, it's usually the other way around. But listen. I was like, I wonder if he's going to talk about John Cena's heel turn on Tall Can this week. And then Rob's just like, screw that.
He's just shutting it down. He's got no time for it.
But, but he has a lot of listener feedback, but I also have to remember he's one of the top wrestling podcasts like around. So
and he's been doing it forever. And,
right. So I tried to kind of copy his model as far as listener feedback goes. Hey, send in your questions, I want to hear where you're listening from. So leave your name and where you're writing from. And I was getting a few, but it was just like kind of the same people every week, which I loved, but it's the same 2 or 3 people every week. So I eventually got away from it, but something's working with the show, because I was at a game in Owen Sound last week, and as I'm walking through the concourse, I just hear someone scream at me, "All 60!" So
there you go.
That makes me feel good. So
for sure, man. I mean, people are listening out there. There's no doubt about it. You do a nice show, and I want to talk to you. You mentioned you were just in Owen Sound. You've been a lot of places here. Before we do, I got to mention, I'm going to have a little pint here while we talk. You are unable to do so, as you mentioned there a few minutes ago. In just a couple short hours, you will be responsible for the lives of several other people, so it seems reasonable that you're not going to partake in any alcohol at the moment. I, luckily, don't have anyone's life in my hand other than my own, so I'm going to have a pint here. This is just a 4.5% New England Pale Ale from the Bicycle Craft Brewing Company here in Ottawa. And this is called their Citrus Garland, which is an odd enough name, but it says kind of, obviously it's going to have some citrus to it. They're saying it's going to be a little grapefruit to it. That's what we're going to roll with here on a Wednesday afternoon as we talk to Steve McLean. As I get into that, let me ask you a little...
As we make way for grapefruit.
Yeah, exactly.
I have to drop some Simpsons references in here. So,
as we sort of dive into this a little bit, I want to save, we're going to talk about some of the big series here in the CHL playoffs in a few minutes, but I do want to talk about the fact that you have recently completed all 60 arenas in the CHL. And we'll get to the end, towards the end. I want to start at the beginning here. We're not going to go through every arena you visited and what it looked like. That is available, though, on your social media, which we will link to in the show notes here at tallcanaudio.com or on your podcast app. But at what point does this become a thing for you that I'd like to finish the whole league? Because, look, clearly you have been for a very long time a junior hockey fan, an OHL guy, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I sort of imagine it like, in the early days, I'm a fan of such and such team, and they happen to be playing this week in Hamilton or next week in Mississauga or the week after. And maybe it just sort of starts casually, and then you start branching out and seeing games in other OHL arenas that don't involve your favorite team. But at what point, does it become a passion to no, I want to see most of the arenas in the OHL and nearby, and then it becomes more branching out, and it becomes like a thing in view where you can go, I might actually be able to get to all of these, and that becomes the quest here.
Yeah, it certainly, I've had that question thrown at me a lot, is when did you decide to do this and how long did it take? And it's kind of a loaded question, because certainly the goal at the beginning was never to do all 60 across the entire CHL. It would be unrealistic. I started going to road games, I would say, must have been about 19 years old. This was around the 07-08 season. I was a fan of the Brampton Battalion growing up because I grew up in Brampton, and going to games in Mississauga was easy enough. Their arena is only 7 kilometers from Brampton's, but eventually, throughout 07-08, started branching out a little bit. And the goal at the beginning was just to do all 20 in the OHL. The whole reason for this love of travel, I have to give a shout out to my pal Kevin Jordan, who did a lot of the traveling with me, but he did the OHL long before I did, and he had a website dedicated to it, OHLArenaGuide.com. And I happened to find that in grade 12 tech class one day. I was just screwing around on the computer, found his website because, we're looking up OHL arenas. I was kind of curious. And then here was all this plethora of photos and information about all the rinks. And it was just cool stories to read out of him. So that's really what got me wanting to do it myself. And he had a section on his website of a bunch of people who had done all 20 in the OHL. So I wanted to be part of that. Took me about 2 years once I really started getting after it. My, Brampton and Mississauga was doing those because didn't need a car and didn't need to travel for those. But
sure.
My third rink, when I really branched out, was Barrie in October of 07. And it's funny enough, October 25th, 2007, I went to Barrie for the first time. Exactly 2 years later, October 25th, 2009, I finished all 20 in the OHL with a game in Ottawa. And most of it was Brampton.
Save the furthest for last, basically. I guess the Sioux's pretty far, too. But.
Yeah, the Sioux's the furthest one. And I almost got to all 20 in a single season. The 08-09 season, I did a hell of a lot of traveling. I finally had a car by that point. Brampton was really good that year. We went to the OHL final, and I was just wanting to travel everywhere. And as the season went on, I managed to hit all 4 quarters pretty much except Ottawa. And it was funny enough, first round of the playoffs that year, Brampton swept Peterborough, and we were just kind of sitting waiting for a week to see who our round 2 opponent was going to be, to the point that they had done a mock-up of potential schedules because one of the series went 7 games. It was Niagara and Ottawa. And if Ottawa won, we were going to play Ottawa in the second round, and they put out a schedule like, here's the Brampton-Ottawa schedule. And if Ottawa lost, we'd play Mississauga. And I had it pretty much set. I was going to go to Ottawa for one of those games, and then Ottawa ended up, as the 2 seed. Or actually, no, sorry, it was the 3-6 seed. Ottawa lost Game 7 in overtime, and so without that, I would have gotten to all 20 in a single season. But got to Ottawa the next fall, and it was fun. And oddly enough, the game I went to in Ottawa to finish all 20 was randomly a game against Saginaw on a Sunday afternoon. And then I was back in Ottawa 5 days later for a Battalion game as well. So, yeah, I hit him up twice with a Metallica concert in between.
Nice.
So,
all right.
Yeah. But that's what got the OHL done. And as far as the other leagues go, I started going to Memorial Cups here and there. Around 2013 was my first one out in Saskatoon. And I was starting to hit just a couple rinks here and there just by doing Memorial Cups. And I started getting to a couple more outside of Memorial Cups before the pandemic. I had done 2 WHL trips. I think I had finished about 7 or 8 WHL arenas before the pandemic. I had finished 7 Q rinks before the pandemic. It really was when I did my first big time Q trip in the fall of 2018. Kevin and I went to Chicoutimi, Baie-Comeau, and Rimouski. And Baie-Comeau in Quebec is one of the more isolated teams out there. It's about a 5-hour drive east of Quebec City. And once we did that trip, it was like, well, this is one of the more isolated ones. If we did this, why can't I do all of them? And it took a while, and the pandemic slowed things down a bit, but after that really kicked things into high gear. And look at me, I got it done finally this season, and been a hell of a lot of travel, a lot of miles racked up, but it's been a blast doing it.
Well, so the final arena, at least for now, and we can get into that, was Victoria. And, it seemed like they treated you pretty well out there. They knew that this was a thing. Had you sort of tagged them in some social media posts? Had someone else mentioned it? Like, how was it that this landed on their radar, that you were coming in there? This was going to be the final stop on a tour over the course of years and years that has seen you get to all 60 arenas in the CHL. They looked like they were ready for you. They had a couple of gifts. They made a deal out of it on their social media. Do you know how you sort of landed on their radar?
Yeah, I know exactly what happened there. So when Kevin and I would do these trips, especially in the Q or out west, we usually would, we're active on Twitter, and we would tag those teams, something like, hey, we're in at Baie-Comeau tonight, or at Halifax, or wherever we are, and just, with a picture or something, and not even to be like, hey, make a big deal out of it for us. If they like the tweet or give it a retweet or just say, hey, welcome, that's good enough for us, right? Sure. We're not looking to be made a big deal out of. When Kevin finished his all 60 before me, we went on a trip back in October where we did a lot of the WHL American teams. We did we started off with a Seattle Kraken game.
Good to get those out of the way there. Before things got a little too tense around the board.
Yeah, we're pretty happy that we did that. Can't lie. But we did a Seattle Kraken game, and then the following 4 days, we did the Wenatchee Wild, the Spokane Chiefs, the Portland Winterhawks, and the Tri-City Americans. Tri-City, the last game of the trip, that was Kevin's all 60. It was number 59 for me. He had Victoria on me. And, when we had the trip planned out, I emailed the Tri-City Americans because I wanted this to be a big deal for Kevin. And I said, hey, I told them the whole story and how he was finishing all 60. And they kind of came back with, oh, that's awesome. Does he want to be in like the intermission mini game or something like that? Which he was not too interested in. But they were like, yeah, fair enough. That's fine. And we really didn't hear anything from them at that. But we did our usual tag them in a post the day of game. And in the end, the GM of the team came by and gave us some vouchers for concession stand. They put us, they made an announcement about our presence there at one of the intermissions. So, we don't expect teams to do anything, right? So the fact that they even did that, Kevin was pretty happy and trying to make his all 60 experience a great one. And I should say other teams, I remember the Edmonton Oil Kings, and, treating us very well. They put us in one of those intermission timeout games and gave us some free swag. They came by with some pucks for us, so they treated us well too. But Kevin wanted to return the favor. He was not on the trip with me to Victoria. As I said, he had already done a Victoria Royals game before. And I had another friend with me. We also did a Vancouver Canucks and a Calgary Flames game on this trip with Victoria squeezed in between, since I didn't want to fly all the way across the country for just one hockey game.
Sure.
So Kevin emailed the Royals beforehand, and then when I did and let them know, and then when I did my usual pregame tweet and tagging the Royals, I got a DM from the Royals and saying, "Hey, when you get in the rink, meet me here, and we have something for you." And when I got in there, I believe her name was Laura from the Royals. She met me, and she had a team signed stick for me, and not just a team signed stick, but they personalized it. They whoever it was, the trainer or whoever got the signatures, also wrote on it all CHL Arena 60/60 Victoria, BC, and the date on it. And I thought that was really, really cool, and so grateful to the Royals for that. They put me on the video board at one point during the first period and got a pretty big ovation, more than I would have expected. Like, I even saw a few stick taps from players on the bench, which I thought was really cool. So they treated me so well. And then I got this stick and I kind of realized, oh shit, I've got like 3 flights between now and home, and carting this hockey stick around is going to be a little tough. Like, I'm sitting there with it in the seats, like in between my legs, kind of holding it up, and it's like, oh, this is a little awkward now.
Is this going to be my carry-on for the next 3 days?
Right. So I thankfully, before the game was over, I texted Laura again and said, "Hey, I really hate to ask, because I don't want to seem ungrateful or anything like that, or be like, now you're going to do this for me," right? But I said, would it be possible? I made the offer to pay for it. I said, "Can you guys ship this back to Ontario for me?" And not only did they do that, but they didn't make me pay for it either. So they were awesome in that regard. And like I said, can't say enough nice things about the Victoria Royals organization. They, for lack of a better term, treated me like royalty while I was there. And and even at the intermission, after I'd been on the video board, second intermission, I tried to go give the stick back to her for them to ship, and I couldn't get to her because I kept getting stopped by a bunch of people. All of the off-ice officials, about 6 of them, stopped me, and they wanted to hear my story, and one of them gave me a free puck, and a lot of fans were stopping me, and few people wanted pictures with me. It was a pretty neat deal. I can't say enough about the organization and the fans in Victoria. It was pretty awesome.
Well, and it is a cool story, though, right? Like, to see a dedication like that to junior hockey across Canada, the fact that you get to all these arenas, and we're going to talk about the fact that you may soon have new arenas on your list here, but some of these teams move too, right? Like, just in the time that you've done this, somebody builds a new arena in Sarnia or whatever it might be. It wasn't Sarnia, but it happens across the league, right? So
you were waiting for me to correct you on that one. Like, no, they've been in the same rink since whenever.
Well, it's funny. I went briefly to school in Sarnia, and the arena was basically brand new at the time, or pretty close to it. So I knew right away I had hit the wrong one. But no, it's unique. I'm curious, when you were talking to these people, across, on social media, or people you'd run into, or maybe the Victoria Royals crew themselves, how many people are we sure have done this ahead of you and Kevin? Like, it can't be that many.
Yeah. There's obviously no way to know for sure, but as far as we know, 4 people have done it.
Okay.
Myself and Kevin, obviously. Then there's a gentleman we know who and are friends with, named Jamie Tozer. He's based out of St. John's, St. John, New Brunswick, I should say.
I think I follow him for some Q News. Yeah.
You probably do. Shout out to Station Nation.
There you go. Yeah.
And he travels. He's a madman. He's got the NHL done. He's got the AHL done as well. We did a trip back in January. Kevin and I were going to go to an AHL game in Wilkes-Barre, Scranton, to see the Penguins play, and that just happened to be the only AHL rink that Jamie did not have. So we invited him along, and we were there for his all 32 of the AHL. But he's done it. He was actually the first to do it that we know of. He got the CHL done. I think it was in early 2023, I believe, that he got it finished. Kevin was number 2 in the fall of 2024. And then there's a guy that we didn't really know, and his name is actually escaping me right now. He has a Twitter account, and but he doesn't really post too often on it. There's a Facebook group called Arena Stadium Chasers, and he made a post in December. He finished, he's based out of, I think, the Vancouver area, and he posted that he was now finishing all 60 himself with games in, I think it was Owen Sound, Peterborough, and Brampton back in December. So as far as we know, he's the third to do it, and I'm the fourth. So there may be more out there, but they haven't made themselves known yet.
I do want to ask you a little bit about the CHL playoffs, but we do have to talk. Well, there's two things I got left on this front, honestly. First, we are in a wicked state of flux right now with state of NCAA hockey and the relationship with the USHL and the CHL and the way players are going to be able to move a little more freely here. We already know for sure there is another new team coming into the WHL next year, and I believe another one the year after.
Yes.
How much will this remain a passion for you? Like, you have completed all 60 traditional CHL markets right now. As those two pop up, will it be like an itch for you? Like, I got to get out there now and check those two off. And then maybe we end up adding like Lewiston to the queue or something like, I got to get out there. Or is it sort of like, I've done it based on my understanding of it. If I can get to another one and check a couple out over the next few years, that'd be great. But, I've completed the mission, or does the mission continue to expand now that the leagues are continuing to expand?
I can always say from here on out that I did all 60 at one point. At one point in time, I had done all CHL arenas, and that's a big thing for me. But at the same time, I didn't do it just to say that I did it. I do it because I enjoy doing it, and I enjoy going to places that I haven't been or seen and seeing differences in arenas. And so, yeah, it's going to continue. I can't wait to get to Newfoundland this fall. I've never been to Newfoundland before. It's the only province in Canada I've not hit yet, other than the three northern territories. But
sure.
The Newfoundland Regiment, I can't wait to do a game there at what they used to call it Mile One Stadium. I believe it's Mary Brown Center now. But,
awesome! Love Mary Brown.
Yeah. It's superior to KFC, I'll say that. But so I can't wait to get there in the fall. Penticton and Chilliwack are definitely going to be on the to-do list now. But because, Penticton's coming in this fall to the WHL, Chilliwack is not coming in until the 26-27 season. Those two teams are going to be kind of close to each other, and I still haven't done an AHL game in Abbotsford either. So I think the play here is to actually wait a full season. I'm going to wait for Chilliwack to be in the league and then go out and kind of knock off all three at once to be a little bit efficient with it, But I'm looking forward to that, and I hope more teams get at it. I was really excited at the prospect of a couple of USHL teams coming over to the OHL. There was, rumors of Muskegon and Youngstown coming in. That's not happening for this fall, and obviously, as we mentioned with the US and a little bit of this whole debacle going on right now. I really don't want to go to the United States right now, so them holding off at least one more year is good for me. And the Q's talked about U.S. expansion too. It seems like Manchester, New Hampshire would be the perfect place to put a team. But if you're going to put a team down there, you're probably going to want to put in a second team for them to be close to as well. So, and the Q, moving up to 20 teams might be the best thing for them. So I'm always on the lookout for new things to do. And I've also been kind of branching out, doing the NHL, AHL, and ECHL. But with the U.S. kind of off the table for me for the immediate future, I've even started thinking about maybe going to Europe. I've never been to Europe in my life, and I was looking at some, I'm sure you've seen like some of the crowds over there are absolutely nuts. It's like soccer crowds, but with hockey, with the sport that I love, right? So, I've even,
our friend Paul Romanuk says Switzerland is where you start. He's always talked about the Spangler Cup and getting into some of those teams. So maybe that's although I think Switzerland's a fairly expensive place to visit, but
that was just what I was about to say. Switzerland would be the dream. Going to a game at in Davos there where they have going to the Spangler Cup would be amazing. Unfortunately, that's at Christmas time, and my seniority is as such as I don't think I'm going to get vacation time during Christmas for about another 20 years. So, traveling around that time of year is not possible. That's why people always say, do you ever want to go to the World Juniors? Sure, I'd love to go to the World Juniors, but it's not going to happen.
Right.
But just doing regular club games is good enough for me. And yeah, Switzerland is expensive, so I've tempered my expectations maybe on that. But I've thought I think doing a little bit of research might start off with Germany in the fall of 2026. And that way I get to include one of my other passions in that, and that's racing and going to do drive the Nürburgring, I think would be it's always been a bucket list item for me. And they have teams in the German Pro League that are very close to there. And it'd be cool to kind of do everything in a single, if I go over for a week or something, it'd be pretty cool.
You did, after you finished this all 60, put out a thread on Twitter with listing in order your favorite rinks from 60 down to 1. I'll be honest with you, I was reading through it, waiting to see where Oshawa was going to. I ended up being fine with it. If I saw it in like the 50s or 40s, I was going to have a word with you, but I kept getting down there. I'm like, all right, it's fine. Now, I know there's some really old barns out there, and Oshawa's only about 20 years old, so it was going to be okay. But let's name and shame here. I want you to tell me, and the good listener, who was at 60, who has the least desirable barn in the CHL as you saw it, and who was at number 1? Who's got the best home rink in the CHL right now?
So going to the bottom of the list, I'm going to actually name the bottom 2 because one building, the building that's actually the worst, I actually put at 59. And that would be Charlottetown, the Eastlink Center in the Q.
Ouch.
And what saved them from being number 60 is, that old cliche of people from PEI are super nice.
Right.
We had a lot of people talk to us that night. They were so cool. And that's kind of a factor I always put into when I'm ranking these places. It's not just the building itself, but it's the atmosphere and how people treat you too, right?
Yeah, the experience.
Yeah, the experience as a whole. And I also, let people know that, hey, this is just based on my experience the night that I happen to be there, right? Sometimes you get a night where the crowd's just not into it. I've heard,
maybe the night you visit, the home team's getting bounced 7-2 or something, and they're just not having a very good time, and it's,
Yeah, like Swift Current I had pretty low at 56, and I've always heard about what a madhouse that place can be. The time we were there just happened to be while they were rebuilding. It was an early season game. The night we were there, it was absolutely dead.
Right.
And while I want to rank them higher, in addition to just not having the best building, I ranked them pretty low because the atmosphere was a dud that night.
Sure.
Charlottetown, the people were awesome, but the rink is just pretty terrible. It's laid out horribly. It's not even that old. It was built in 1990, so it's about 35 years old now. But it's a smaller building, which usually I like, but the seating is way too shallow. If you're sitting in behind the nets, you can't even actually see the bottom half of the net, so it's obstructed view. The layout and how to get around is a mess. And I've even heard from people in the media who say that the press box is not the nicest in the world too. So they have big renovations coming. They're actually, and I'm surprised they wouldn't just build a new rink, but I guess they figure the renovations is cheaper. But their idea is to somehow slam a second deck on top of this thing.
Oh, wow.
So, the old saying, polish a turd, I guess. But hey, I'll give them another shot. When they get that done, I'll go back to Charlottetown and see if it betters the experience. The building that I actually have at number 60 is also in the queue, and it's the home of the Blainville-Boisbriand Armada, the Centre d'Excellence Sports Rousseau, which is basically the French version of Pro Hockey Life. It's just boring, basically. There's nothing wrong with the building. It's a really nice community building that you could very much see a junior A or junior B team playing in. It's the absolute biggest no frills version of a rink you've ever seen. And on top of that, the crowds are just not very good either. It's the suburbia of Montreal. And just like in Toronto, people in the suburbs of, the big hockey centers don't seem to care about junior quite as much. And that's the same thing in Blainville. I know they've had a couple deep runs in the playoffs, and they've made it to the finals before, and they had good crowds for that. But again, I was there for a couple regular seasons. I've actually been there twice. It's how much I've gone. I went back a second time for the benefit of a friend who hadn't been there, but the second time I went back, the crowd was even worse, and it was like, oh my god. But but yeah, so it's just a very no frills dead arena, and that's why I have Blainville ranked last.
Who do we got up at number 1?
This hurts, man. This really hurts. I don't want to. I didn't want to put them there, but you got to respect the building, and it would be the biggest rival, our arch rival of the Guelph Storm. It's the Kitchener Memorial Auditorium, the home of the Kitchener Rangers. That place is just a cathedral of junior hockey in my mind.
I've only been there once, and I'll be honest, it wasn't for junior hockey. There was in 2005 or 6, they hosted the Women's Four Nations Cup, and it was Canada, USA, and a gold medal hockey game. This is the prime of Haley Wickenheiser and that group, right? And that barn was just hopping, right? The volume of it, the look of it, all the red jerseys around, kind of that wood, finished it. Like, it was a great place to see hockey. It wasn't a junior hockey game, but I'm happy to say I've at least stepped inside that one because it has an awesome vibe and an awesome kind of history to it.
Right, it's the vibe. It feels like a mini Maple Leaf Gardens,
sure, in
a way, and like the seats are colored as such with the gold and red seating, and there's just history all over the place. Obviously, the Rangers, as much as it pains me to say, have had a lot of success over their time in the OHL, and it's obviously on display everywhere. The crowds are usually very good. They did renovate it about 10 years ago, and they added a whole bunch of seats on one side. So they didn't put a second deck on. They just kind of made it go up higher, which made it feel even more like Maple Leaf Gardens. It's just like this one giant stand that goes up all the way. And because of that, they don't entirely fill it anymore. But the lower seats where the Renko has always been, they're still usually full, and it's just a great place to watch junior hockey, and I absolutely love it. And even if I'm watching the Rangers win games, which is never fun, but Kitchener, everyone who is into junior hockey, if you haven't been to a game in Kitchener, absolutely go do it. You owe it to yourself to go. And because we don't know how much time it has left, I know Kitchener has been talking about getting a new rink at some point. This rink was built in 1950, and you can only renovate it so many times before it's time to put it out to pasture. So it's not imminent or anything, but I would say in the next decade, we're probably looking at maybe a replacement there. So definitely go to Kitchener. It's an awesome time.
Well, let's get into the CHL playoffs a little bit. And we obviously don't have time today to go through every series across all 3 leagues, but I do want to pick
break down the power play and PK of
seriously,
the 8th
seed, tell me about the Blainville Boisbriand PK. Yeah, no, I'm sort of curious though, in each league, which 1 or 2 matchups that you'd be keeping an eye on. And I want to start here, and maybe it's not a matchup, but Rob and I briefly talked, and you and I discussed this before we fired up the recording here. We got into a little bit of QMJHL talk on the Monday show, which is a subject that neither he nor I are knowledgeable about, but that's never stopped us before. And you and I have actually had this conversation once or twice 100 years ago about the idea that, oh, look, it's World Junior time. Here comes Matt and Rob, who are going to pay attention now for a couple of weeks. Really, Matt, tell us more about Porter Martone. I know you've got a lot of great insights on that guy. I had some comments on the playoff format in the Q and the fact that they have a crossover. If you make it in, and it saw us this year with Drummondville and Halifax.
Right.
And it feels rough to me, man. And the reason I bring up all the other preamble is that maybe this isn't rough at all. Maybe this is exactly the way it should be, and Matt's just out to lunch again. But it feels rough that first place in the West has to travel this far. And in theory, it could be a Gatineau. Like, there is no, in this league, further points than Gatineau to Halifax. And it works for me in the CFL. I like the crossover. But you cross over from the West to the East, and you were going to be a road team anyway. So the team that did its business in the regular season still gets a home game, but it's a one-off. In a series like this, everybody's got to travel, and I don't love that a first-place team is going all the way to Halifax. Am I out to lunch a little bit? Has this just always been the way it is? Do people in the queue care about it? Am I sort of missing the point here? Or?
No, it's a very valid argument for sure. You finish first place, and what's your reward? You got to go all the way to Halifax. Now, luckily, in the first round, in the entire Q playoffs, if you're over a certain distance from the team that you're up against, the league pays for you to fly. So there is no busing. The Drummondville Voltigeurs will not be busing to Halifax for this series.
You're calming me down already.
Also, too, for a long time, there really was no conferences. Conferences were just there, and divisions were just there for scheduling purposes in the regular season. For a very long time, the Q actually did a 1-16 format. So you could get the Cape Breton Eagles and the Rouen-Noranda Huskies in the first round. And you could play anyone at any time in the playoffs. Didn't matter. So they kind of went back to this, conference format, 1 versus 8. But as we know, the Q is only 18 teams and only 2 missed the playoffs. So you got to be pretty bad to miss the playoffs. But that's why you get some teams in at the 8th seed who are like, ooh, geez, this team's not going to be here long. Halifax being that team this year. But, just the makeup of the geography of the league, there are 12 teams in Quebec and 6 in the Maritimes. And, they have the 4 most Eastern Quebec teams in the Eastern Conference with the rest of the Maritime teams, but yet they still only play each other twice a year. The Maritimes, you can almost call it its own league down there. Those 6 teams play each other a lot more, and it's just it's a hard way to do it. There's no real perfect solution here unless you add more teams in the Maritimes, and they can become their own conference, I guess. But the way they do it now is just kind of the best case scenario that they have. Someone's going to have to cross over because you can't, as we saw this year, the worst team, there's only 8 teams in the Western Conference, and the worst team in the league this year, Victoriaville Tigre, they aren't good enough to make the playoffs. So you got to have someone slot into that 8th spot in the Western Conference. And this year happens to be Halifax. There are some years where all 10 teams in the Eastern Conference are good enough to make the playoffs, because that's the way it works. The 2 worst teams, no matter what conference they're in, are the ones that miss the playoffs. So you could have only 6 in the West and 10 in the East, and you have 2 teams crossing over. Right. So that's happened before. Now, what the Q will do, and I will say this, now Halifax, in the highly unlikely event that the Halifax Mooseheads actually win their first round matchup against Drummondville, they do stay in the Western Conference for round 2. So, they would play the next highest seed in round 2. That's not going to happen. But as Mooseheads fans get mad at me, but what the Q does is they do reseed the entire league for round 3. So there are no real conference finals. It's just the third. It's just the third round. So, you don't have the top 2 teams in the league playing each other in the first or second round like you might see. I've heard you and Rob talk about all year the NHL divisional format, and how it's like, you're going to have Dallas or Colorado going home in the first round this year, and that just does not seem right at all. And the WHL dabbled with that as well. They did a divisional playoff format for a few years there. And it just so happened to be during the time that there was a couple years there where we had 3 100-point teams all in the same division. And that's just like insane. And especially with how, you as your knowledge of junior hockey aside, that the first round of the playoffs in junior, when you're talking about those 1 versus 8, it's not like a 1 versus 8 would be in the NHL where both teams have a real equal shot here. Like the 8 seeds in junior are not very good, and they're usually getting bounced in 4, maybe 5 games. So
that's it, right? You got 20 teams in the O and 16 making the playoffs, and even it's even worse than that in the Q. And worse is a relative term, but you know what I mean in terms of the number of teams getting in. I was sort of looking at, and I've with a little bit of an ear to the ground, I've been hearing about Moncton all year, but I wasn't aware of quite what a season it's been for them. Are they the odds-on favorite out there in the Q this year?
Yeah, it seems to be a battle between Moncton and Rimouski. Rimouski's the team hosting the Memorial Cup this year, so they loaded up at the trade deadline. But Moncton's got a lot of unfinished business. Moncton last won the QMJHL title in 2010. They had a really good team in 2020. They looked like they loaded up. They were going to be the team to beat in 2020. And then the world stopped turning pretty much, and the playoffs got canceled, and they got really screwed that year because, they gave up all those assets and didn't get to reap any of the rewards for it. They had to go back into rebuild mode with nothing to show for it. I know they're really hungry for it this year. This is a team, their record is absolutely insane this year. They went 53-9-2 for 108 points. Their goal differential is like plus 150. This is a team that is absolutely stacked this year. I think Rimouski can give them a run because Rimouski's very good as well. But anything outside of Moncton Rimouski winning the Q this year, I think would be pretty surprising to me. It's just the path. What's the path that they take to get there?
Sure. So both of those teams expected to roll here a little bit, but what is something that you would expect in the Q to be competitive? If there was one series to keep an eye on, these guys are going to go to war. What does that look like?
There's a couple series in the queue that I'll drop here. The 4-5 matchup, as you would expect in any series, those are usually the best ones. Baie-Comeau and Cape Breton in the Eastern Conference is the 4-5 matchup. Those teams had almost identical records this year. Just a couple extra shootout losses for Cape Breton was the difference, and Baie-Comeau gets home ice. This is a rematch of the third round from last year. Baie-Comeau was the top team in the queue last year. They've had a pretty good series with Cape Breton that they won in 5. In last spring, and that rivalry, even though they only play each other 2 times in the regular season, that rivalry seems to have boiled over, and Cape Breton actually just made their lone trip of the season to Baie-Comeau a couple of weeks ago, and that game was very physical, and I think by that point everyone knew that this was going to be the matchup.
Yeah, we're setting the tone here a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. So, and it's going to be a 2-3-2 matchup, but I was just talking to Patrick McNeil, and even though Cape Breton is the team that doesn't have home ice, they kind of really benefit as far as the travel is concerned. So they're not headed up to Baie-Comeau. Game 1 is on Friday night, so they're headed up there on Thursday, going to have a practice, but then game 2 is right away on Saturday afternoon. So they're actually coming right back to Cape Breton on Saturday. So they only got to spend 2 nights up there. Whereas the Baie-Comeau Drakkar, with the way that the league does this with the travel, the league pays for flights, but usually they'll send both teams on the same plane to help save money.
Sure.
So Baie-Comeau now has to go back to Cape Breton on Saturday themselves. And now it's 3 games in Cape Breton, and it's spread out over the course of 4 days. So game 5, assuming this series goes beyond 5 games and they have to go back to Baie-Comeau, Baie-Comeau has to spend a week in Sydney, Nova Scotia, whereas Cape Breton, they only have to spend 2 nights in Baie-Comeau. So
yeah, the home team's getting. This has always been the argument a little bit about the 2-3-2, right? If you split at home and then got to go down, you're sort of in trouble, right? Like.
Yeah. But, Patrick was telling me that in the history of the Cape Breton Eagles, they've only been in 14 series in a 2-3-2 format, and the team with home ice advantage, with the 4 games at home, have won every single time.
Okay.
So we'll see if that's the case here, but it's a really close series. I expect that to be a really good one. I also want to talk about the 3-6 in the Eastern Conference, more so for sentimental reasons. We talked about the Acadie Bathurst Teton. They're moving to St. John's, Newfoundland next year.
Right.
They are the 6th seed in this. While attendance has always been an issue there, and it's part of the reason why they're moving. Obviously the nostalgia is out now, and a lot of people are coming back. They sold out their final home game of the season this past weekend. It was against the powerhouse Moncton Wildcats, and they gave them a great show. They tied the game against Moncton 5-5 with 1 second left. The crowd was going absolutely bonkers for it. Moncton did win that game in the end, but the Bathurst Teton, they have a decent team. This is a younger team. Newfoundland's going to inherit some good players on this one, and this is one of those. Chicoutimi, the team they're going up against, is the number 3 seed in the Eastern Conference, and they're pretty solid themselves. But Patrick and I kind of both picked this as an upset. Part of it is sentimental reasons, but part of it is there's something about Bathurst that seems like they can get this job done. They're not that far off from Chicoutimi, and they're riding a wave right now, and I think we can get some good hockey out of it. I won't be surprised if Chicoutimi wins this series at all, but if there's a chance for an upset, I think that's where you might see it.
Let's go out west before we come home to Ontario, and look at There's some interesting matchups here too as I'm looking at it, but I don't know anything. For whatever reason, I can't tell. And maybe it's just the big names of the franchises. The one that jumps out to me, and obviously I'll hand it to you afterwards to take us to the more interesting ones, should I be way off market. But it's the Calgary Hitmen and the Saskatoon Blades, right? These are reasonably big markets. These are kind of historically good franchises and fan bases. For whatever reason, that one jumped out to me. Is that likely to be a good long series?
It has the potential for it to be a long series. Saskatoon, they were the number one team in the dub last year in the regular season. They loaded up big time. And this is a franchise that they've been around for some 60 years, and they've never won the league title. So last year was really that, all right, it's now or never. And unfortunately for them, they fell in the Eastern Conference Final, a full 7-game series where 6 of the games went to overtime.
Wow.
It was pretty crazy that went down, but they were on the losing end of it. They came back this year with a pretty decent roster, but of course they lost some big names, and it was at the point where even though they were rolling along pretty good through the regular season, if they did not sell off this year, they were going to be in really big trouble, for the next several years down the road. So they did have to do a sell off. They were battling for first place when that happened. But again, you really hurt the franchise long term if you don't do it.
Right.
They still kept rolling along pretty well here. And if you look at the standings, while they end up as the 6th seed in the Eastern Conference, they just lost out on the division title by 2 points to Prince Albert. It came down to the final game of the season between Saskatoon and Prince Albert to see who would win that division and get the number 2 seed. Unfortunately, Saskatoon lost out on it, but Calgary, they are just an absolutely loaded roster. They loaded up at the deadline. They got Tanner Howe from the World Junior team, as well as Carter Yakimchuk as well. That was really one of the big steals of the deadline for Calgary. So they've been rolling along pretty well. Calgary themselves lost out in the same situation. They played Medicine Hat in the final game of the season for the division title and the number 1 seed in the East. They lost that game, but I think Calgary, in the end, Calgary is going to win this series, but I would not be surprised if Saskatoon really pushes them. There's just something about that Blades team. They will not go away this season. And the Blades have got a really good look at that one. A couple other series I just want to quickly mention. I got to say,
I got my Calgary Hitmen hat ready for these playoffs, but it might be for a different reason that I picked that up. But the logo's sweet.
Brett does not own the team anymore.
I know, but that color scheme and the logo, the old one with the skull and the pink lettering, I love it. I got the hat sitting here. I wear all the time. So.
Well, and like Moncton, this is a team that hasn't had a whole lot of success lately. Calgary, actually, like Moncton, won their last league championship back in 2010. But since then, things have been pretty quiet for them. And I know it's hard to believe that 2010 was 15 years ago, but that's where we're at.
Yeah, I know.
This is a team that up to that point was used to being in the mix all the time, and they really haven't been. So this is a big year for Calgary.
No, I cut you off there. You were going to take us to a couple other series you had your eye on.
Yeah, one in the Western Conference would be the Prince George Cougars and the Portland Winterhawks. Same situation as Cape Breton and Baie-Comeau. This is the 4-5 series in the West, and this will also happen to be last year's Western Conference final. Prince George is another one of those teams. They've never even made it to the league final before, let alone win the title. Last year, many people thought it would be the year, and in the end, Portland, who has had tons of success over the years, got it done in 6 games. This year, Prince George is the higher seed again, but Portland won all 4 regular season games against these two teams this year. Portland just seems to have Prince George's number. And while Prince George was expected to be one of the top-end teams in the Western Conference this year, they certainly didn't have a bad season, but they seemed a little bit of a step off from a couple of the top teams. So curious as to see how this one plays out. I think Portland can make this a much closer series than many might expect, just looking at the stats on paper. I think that one's a good one. A hell of a lot of travel. Again, this is a 2-3-2 setup.
Yeah.
Because I believe it's something like 1,400 kilometers between these two cities, Portland, Oregon, all the way up to Prince George, BC. Prince George being the most isolated team in the entire CHL. Yeah. So some some tough travel for them on that one. But one last series, as I said, we're not going to go through all of them here, but Lethbridge and Brandon is that 4-5 series in the Eastern Conference. Lethbridge did a big load up this year. They got in a couple players from last year's WHL champion Moose Jaw Warriors. Jackson Unger in goal, pretty good for Lethbridge. But Brandon, they were right in that fight with Saskatoon and Prince Albert for the East Division title. This is going to be an interesting one in that Brandon does not actually get their home rink for this series. And this is a common occurrence for the Brandon Wheat Kings. The Manitoba Royal Winter Fair takes over their home arena every year. And usually if Brandon has home ice in the first round, then they can usually work around that. They get a couple of games out of the way and then they go somewhere else for a week while the fair is going on. But unfortunately for them, Lethbridge has home ice in this series. So Brandon, all three of their home games in this series have been moved to a Junior A arena in Verdun, Manitoba, which is some 77 kilometers west of Brandon, 1,200 seats.
No.
Yeah, so this has the potential of being very interesting to watch a big WHL matchup taking place.
Sure,
in just this
but far from ideal,
barn.
right?
Yeah, so this one is just more of I picked Lethbridge to win this in 7, but I could also see Lethbridge making quick work of Brandon. It's one of those weird situations just because Brandon is not going to have a true home ice advantage when they are on home ice. And Lethbridge, they've got some things to prove here. I feel like there might be just a step off from the real juggernauts in the East of Medicine Hat and Calgary. So we'll see if they can kind of get things done. But I picked Lethbridge to go to the WHL final. Part of that was just to be a little bit different from my co-host, Ryan Schweitzer, because he did the predictable thing. He picked the 1 seeds out of both conferences to win, to go to the final. So I wanted to be a bit different. I said Lethbridge was going to get there. So it's time for them to prove me right, and they got to knock off Brandon to start that.
Well, let's finish it off here at home in Ontario. And look, I have no idea if this series is going to be any good, but one of the things that always jumps out to me, and after just talking about the dub, it comes off as fairly ridiculous to talk about travel in Ontario. But Windsor and the Sioux is about as far as you can have to travel. I'm curious, is this just a Q thing, or will those guys fly as well? Or in the O, do you have to stay on the buses?
No, it'll be all busing in the OHL, and it's all the 2-2-1-1-1 format. There is no 2-3-2s in the OHL unless
brutal.
They will do it if there's a building conflict schedule, but
sure.
there is none. And Sioux Windsor is not too bad. I think that's about a 6-hour ride. The worst in the whole league.
Is that
actually,
it? Wow. Okay.
Yeah, the worst in the league.
I guess you'd
is
go up the U.S. side, would you?
For the Spits, yeah, they would definitely go through the U.S.
Yeah,
it's just a straight shot
fair
up
enough.
I-75. It actually might only be 5 hours if I'm thinking about it now.
I've just got it in my head that it's like way the hell up there. But you're right. Maybe if you're already down west and you can go up through the U.S., maybe I'm fair enough.
Well, the absolute worst travel in the whole OHL is Erie in the Sioux. Erie being the most southern team and the Sioux being not only furthest west, but obviously furthest north as well. And it doesn't matter if you're Erie, what path you take. You could kind of go up through Buffalo and up through Canada, or you can go around the other side of Lake Erie to Detroit and then straight up, the way Windsor would take. It doesn't matter. It's the same distance both ways. And those two teams, despite being in the same conference, and they only play each other twice a season because of that travel, they had to play each other in the playoffs. I think it was like 3 or 4 straight years. So, I think, and they didn't fly. I think there was they got some better sleeper buses on that one.
Okay.
Yeah, you mentioned Windsor though. I think Windsor's an interesting story. They have the number 2 seed in the Western Conference. This was the most improved team in the OHL this year. They finished out of the playoffs last year. This is a 52-point gain, which that's not something you'll see in the NHL. But the OHL, even in the OHL, that could be a little rare. But I think Windsor's kind of arrived a year early. Next year is really going to be the year to look out for the Windsor Spitfires. Ilya Protas has been absolutely unreal for the Spits this season, and they should have had 2 50-goal scorers.
This is the brother, is it not, of the guy in Washington?
Yes, it is,
Yeah,
and he's
okay.
also Washington property as well.
Oh, wow,
so,
okay.
Yeah, so Protas, he's having himself a great season, 50-goal scorer for the Windsor Spitfires. Liam Greentree, 49 goals. He probably would have had 50 himself, but he had a 2-game suspension to end the season, so that cost him the 50-goal mark.
Yeah.
But the Spitfires have definitely just been absolute turnaround this year. I don't know if they've got anything for the London Knights this year. I don't know if anyone does, to be honest with you. But Windsor, this is kind of all gravy, in my opinion, for them for next year, getting that experience for the team to really go for it next year when they should be even better than they are now. And as far as this series is concerned, you mentioned Windsor Sioux. I don't think it's going to be a long series, 4, maybe 5 games. But yeah, Windsor gets that done easily.
No, yeah, just one trip up north, and maybe that's not too bad for
Hopefully.
them. You said it there a couple of different times as we've moved across the league. Usually in round 1, the best matchups are at 4-5, so I don't have to sell too hard why Oshawa versus Brampton is going to be a killer matchup here. It's obviously the one I got my eye on. Does this live up to the hype across the rest of the CHL of being a 4-5 worth watching?
This has the potential of easily being not just the best series in the first round, but maybe the best series in the entire playoffs.
Love it.
This is not the way we thought we were going to get Oshawa and Brampton this year. These were the 2 preseason favorites in the Eastern Conference this year. And Oshawa was battling for that number 1 seed in the East all year. For anyone who may be familiar with the standings this year, you had Brantford finishing first with 93, and then Barrie, Kingston, Oshawa all finishing with 88 points.
Yeah.
And Brantford kind of had a hot finish. Like, those 4 teams were swapping first place all season long. And Niagara was up there for a while, and then they cratered by winning only 2 of their final 22 games of the season. So they fell off pretty hard. Oshawa, the unlucky ones, they end up down as the 4th seed. Now, Brampton, they were expected to be in that fight all season. And for whatever reason, they could never seem to get it going. And they were very inconsistent. For every one good game that they would have and maybe knocking off one of the better teams, they would lose 2 or 3. And they were kind of middling down there, 7th and 8th and whatnot. And they didn't even do a whole lot at the deadline. Their biggest acquisition this year was to get Carson Rakoff from the Kitchener Rangers, former 50-goal scorer. They got him back in August before the season started. At the deadline, they got themselves a little bit deeper, but didn't do anything too crazy. But all of a sudden in February, man, the switch just flipped, and they weren't, by that point they were too far behind to catch up to those top 4 teams, but they ended up getting to just 6 points behind the Gens. And this is a team that got a lot of loser points this year, 10 overtime losses this year. And as we know, 3-on-3, might as well just throw that out when it comes to the playoffs. Yeah. And it's a coin flip at best anyway. This Brampton team is just as good as the Gens, maybe better. There's a lot of people picking Brampton to win this series, but at the same time,
losers.
Well, we'll see what happens there. Yeah. I know there's a lot more Jenny's fans than there are Brampton fans, but we'll see what happens. But I like Oshawa in this series. I wouldn't be surprised if Brampton wins this, but Oshawa, they've got that experience. This is a team that went to the OHL final last year, and even though that final was an absolute disaster,
it did not go so well.
I've said to people, we've seen sweeps before in the final, but I don't think I've ever seen a more lopsided final.
Waxed,
in all of sports.
Man. Just unbelievable. I went to game 3 in Oshawa, and that was the closest game. It went to overtime, and Oshawa still lost, but otherwise it was just getting your ass kicked up and down the rink for 4 games. It was unbelievable, man. And that had been a fun run for Oshawa, but it was like playing someone from a different league when you got to that final.
Just to give the good listener some context, so that series against London in the OHL final last year, games 1, 2, and 4, London won by scores of 8-1, 9-1, and 7-1. Game 3, the one that Matt's referring to, he mentions that it was an overtime game, but what he didn't mention is that Oshawa, they played 40 good minutes in the series.
That's right. I think they had a reasonable lead in that game.
Oshawa got a 6-2 lead through 2 periods, and then they blew that lead and lost in double overtime 7-6. So Oshawa gave up at least 7 goals in every single game of the series. It was just a disaster, obviously. That's, like I said, most lopsided series I've ever seen, not just in junior hockey, but in like sports, period.
Yeah.
As far as a league final is concerned. But Oshawa, to their credit, I mean, they had a really tough Eastern Conference final against North Bay. They had the 3-0 series lead. North Bay came all the way back to force a Game 7, which the Gens did win. But I said before that final last year that this could be part 1 of 2. Everyone knew coming back into this season that Oshawa and London were going to be good again, and I predicted that it would be Oshawa and London in the final. And after Oshawa got absolutely waxed, I said while it's very possible that London wins that rematch again this year, it's not going to be what we saw last year. At least I can't imagine it's going to be. No one thought that's what was going to be last year either. But, this is going to be an Oshawa team. They, unfinished business, right? They want revenge for being absolutely embarrassed last year. And they have made some moves to make the team better. And it's kind of those moves where it's like, it's not just to make their team better, but they want to be better against London specifically, because they know that's the team that they're going to have to go through this year. In addition to just all of the great talent that they had already, they brought in Colby Barlow from the Owen Sound Attack, and one of the most underrated ones, Andrew Gibson, who I know some people didn't think too highly of him during the World Juniors, but he has been an absolute monster for the Oshawa Generals in the back end since coming there. This is honestly could be Oshawa's biggest hurdle to get to that final is Brampton.
Well, I was just going to ask you, because you mentioned there's a bunch of teams here right there, right, that, fell in behind Brantford, but with Kingston and what Oshawa's got a hard road here being at 4. But is there any of these teams that you think that were sort of in that top group of 4 that is significantly better than the rest? Or is this likely to be kind of a throw them all in a pit and see what happens, see who comes out of it? Is it all sort of that close?
I honestly wouldn't be surprised to see any of the top 5 teams come out of the East this year. That being said, I think Oshawa and Brantford have a little bit of an edge. Brampton, whoever is, some people have even said whoever comes out of this Oshawa Brampton series is going to win the East. That being said, I don't think people should look past Barrie or Kingston either. Barrie has been very inconsistent, so that's what makes me worry about them.
They pushed Oshawa last year too.
They did. They had a very good series with Oshawa, and they're looking really good. On paper, Barrie should be theoretically one of the best teams in the league, but just for whatever reason, things haven't fully clicked for them. They won their division thanks to the fact that Brampton had such a terrible first half of the season, but that said, they have the guys there to make things work. Kingston is the team this year that really has been an enigma to me, because before the season started, I couldn't tell if they were good or bad or not. It's just one of those teams you just don't have a read on. And as we've gone through the regular season, they've been very good. But at the same time, it seems to be one of those score by committee teams. And they brought in a few guys from the Saginaw Spirit at the trade deadline, and obviously we know Saginaw won the Memorial Cup last year. They pushed London to 6 games in the Western Conference Final. Guys like Joey Willis and Ethan Hay, they're going to be big parts of this, and they also brought in Cedric Goudion from the Owen Sound Attack, who had a great season last year too. So I wouldn't be shocked if the Kingston Frontenacs get through. I think their goaltending can be a little bit suspect at times, so that might be what does them in. But don't be shocked of any of these 5 teams coming out. But my official pick is the Oshawa Generals, which I figured you would like.
Attaboy. Even if you don't mean it, this is the place to say it. Does any of this matter? You mentioned London a couple of minutes ago. Are we just setting up for who gets slaughtered again in the in the O final? Is it cut and dry that it's going to be London here once more?
I think so. Windsor and Kitchener both had some very good seasons this year. Saginaw is a scoring machine with Michael Misa and Zane Parekh, but they can't keep the puck out of their own net. That's why they were a pretty distant 4th in the Western Conference this year. And hey, that series against Erie, if Matthew Schaefer is healthy for the Erie Otters, then Schaefer versus Misa and Parekh would be pretty awesome to watch. But the London Knights, it's just, they're just so damn good. And it's hard to see how any team can beat them in a 7-game series. As I said, I think whoever comes out of the East will give them a better run than Oshawa did last year. But at the same time, it's hard to pick London. 55-11-2 this year. they just seem to have no weak spots. They brought in goaltender Austin Elliott from the WHL. He had a record of 32-1 this season. Yeah, it's just like, what do you do? And you know what? They didn't even have to do a whole lot at the deadline. The only real big move they did was bringing in Cam Allen from the Guelph Storm, who that's been a bit of a controversy because right after he got to London, he was charged with a DUI and missed a lot of time. But the law has given him his punishment on that. The league has given him his punishment on that. He sat out 15 games. He is now back in the lineup, ready to go, regardless of what you think of him in that whole situation. Yeah. He makes that when you're talking about Cam Allen being like your fourth best defenseman on the team, like, come on, like, this is just not fair. And Easton Cowan and one name that a lot of listeners might not recognize, but they should watch out for. I'm sure you probably saw and noticed him last year in the game that you went to in the finals, I should say. Casper Haltonen, who's a San Jose second round pick. He turned it into another gear in the finals last year. He didn't win the MVP of the playoffs, but if they were giving out MVPs for just the league final, he would have been my pick last year. Guy's just an absolute goal scoring machine. And then on top of that, they bring in guys for the USHL, like every team has managed to do this year. Blake Montgomery, from Bowie, Maryland, he's been absolutely fantastic for the Knights this year. He's only played 50 games. He's got 50 points. Point per game player doesn't sound like all that in the OHL when you're talking about guys
when
like,
you just add him and parachute him in out of nowhere. It's not too bad.
Right, exactly. And then on top of all of that, I mentioned all those forwards that they have with Denver Barkey and Easton Cowan and Casper Halton. And their leading scorer was defenseman Sam Dickinson this year with 91 points. So
I watched the World Juniors. I heard he sucks.
People weren't too high on him and Oliver Bonk at the World Juniors, but trust me, when it comes to the OHL playoffs, those are two guys you do not want to go up against. And another underrated guy I'll throw out there for London and people are going to have to watch out for is Landon Sim, 30 goal scorer. Just again, it's just like everywhere you turn, there's another great player staring at you. And I as a Guelph Storm fan, I hope London can't get it done, but I would be pretty surprised if they don't.
Well, you have recently completed your tour across the CHL, visiting every building. We have done a mini version here today, crossing the country leading up to the playoffs. From any of these three leagues, is there anything we failed to touch on? A player to watch, maybe a series, a team that you're a little higher on than most? Just anything we should close on that we haven't touched on yet?
I would say look out for the Spokane Chiefs of the WHL. We didn't get to really touch on them right now, but that has been a team that has been on absolute fire. And while they were a little bit off of the Everett Silvertips as far as the standings
go, those the guys who broke the trophy? Wasn't that Spokane?
That was back in 2008.
That's right.
And everyone says they broke the trophy. I'll give a quick story behind this. So the year before, the Vancouver Giants won the Memorial Cup. And it turns out, they partied pretty hard with that thing that year, and it may have broken. And they went, we'll just fix this and not tell anibody.
Super glue or something.
Yeah. So poor Spokane, they win it on the road, like in Kitchener against Kitchener. So already you got an ornery crowd, and this is an American team, and the Memorial Cup's supposed to be at the Canadian troops and all that. And that poor captain, his name's slipping my mind right now, but
it fell apart in his hands.
Like people think, oh, he dropped it or something. No, he's holding it, and because it just fell apart in his hands. And I was just in Spokane. It was one of my last rinks to hit on the All 60, and when I went into their team store, they have a giant mural behind the cash register of like the trophy broken, and there are two guys looking at it like, oh shit. They embraced it, and I like that.
Why not lean into it, right? There's something about that moment too. I've seen it 100 times online, like the sound of the crowd that's just like, oh, right. And like you said, it's a crowd that's home team has just lost. And like, there's this moment of shock, like, because the guy's, he's not holding it up at the moment. He's sort of holding it in front of him. And it hits the ice in two pieces. You're like, what
Yeah,
happened?
he's waiting for that second guy to come over.
Yes.
There's always the biggest thing of who gets the trophy second, right? And he's skating over to get it.
You can
from
have
the
this
captain.
part, and you can have this part.
Oh, jeez. And yeah, the crowd, the initial shock, and
Yes.
then there's some booing going on, and yeah, it was just, I felt bad for them.
Yeah.
And I was like 17 at the time. I was like, those motherfuckers.
Yes.
You get a little ornery over
Of
that
course,
dumb
they're
shit like that.
disrespecting our trophy.
Right. But, is talking about this year's Spokane team, that again, that's another team that hasn't had a lot of success since that 2008 Memorial Cup. They've had a couple decent runs, but they've never gotten back to the finals since then. They've got, that top line this year. They've got Berkeley Catton, who, of course, was 8th overall pick of Seattle last year.
Right.
They have Shane Van Olm, who, may not be as one of those guys. He's an overage player, so he's not exactly one of those top end prospects that you talk about, but he's a 49 goal guy this year. And then at the trade deadline this year, they brought in Washington Capitals second round pick Andrew Cristall, who he just missed the cut at the World Juniors. And this is one of those guys of like, well, why didn't we bring him, especially a team that had trouble scoring? Since coming to Spokane, he's put up 72 points in 29 games. 132 points to lead the league this year. This guy's just been, and he scored a lot of goals on a pretty terrible Kelowna team. So those guys all together are just absolutely lethal. I would not be surprised. We hadn't talked about them, but I would not be surprised to see Spokane come out of not just the Western Conference of the WHL, but maybe the WHL as a whole.
We'll see if Andrew Cristall can help guide them to some champagne by the end of the season. That's what we do here. As we wrap things up. Yeah, that's fair. The All 60 CHL podcast. What's coming up? You've mentioned you guys have stepped it up here in the playoffs. What can people expect if they want to follow the CHL playoffs through the All 60 podcast?
Yeah, we're going to be doing shows every week. Well, we were a weekly show all season, but now we're going to have each league represented every week. We've got our OHL and WHL playoff previews out as of now. Just before recording this, I recorded the Q one, so I imagine the good listeners hearing this on Thursday.
Yep.
So if they are, as soon as you finish this pod, go over to All 60 CHL pod, and you will have the QMJHL
There you go.
playoff preview there as well. And we're going to be checking back in midway through the first round and throughout the rest of the playoffs, we're going to be talking to each guy. So All 60 CHL pod on the social medias and wherever you get your podcasts, wherever you're listening to this right now, CHL, All 60 CHL pod is there as well.
We will make sure all those links are in our show notes at tallcanaudio.com for this episode or on your podcast app, wherever you're hearing us. Steve, appreciate it, buddy. And congrats on finishing the current All 60. We will look forward to hearing about your trips to Penticton later on and wherever else the league may expand to. But this was fun, man. Thanks for doing it.
Always a good time to be on Tall Can, Matt, and I appreciate you being the voice of our intro. The good listener may not know that, but Matt voiced our intro and social media plugs for us.
It was
so thank
fun.
you for that,
Tried
Matt.
a couple of things, went a little over the top a couple of times, but it was fun, man. Glad to be a part
one
of
the
it.
ones that you used, I think, to be as a joke and try something different is one of the takes I used.
Yeah,
in the
I get
intro,
it.
So
You never know, right? Like I've had a couple friends of mine here voice some things for me, and sometimes people just get a little silly, try some things, you go, actually, that's not bad. You grab it. So
Yeah.
you never know what you're going to get when you put someone on a mic. So thanks a lot, man. Appreciate it.
thanks, Matt.
Thank you so much for checking out this edition of the Tall Can Audio Podcast. Stick around later on in the week. We'll be talking to our buddy Chris Hoffley for the first time in 2025. Want to talk to him about Ed Hervey's opinion that there's no superstars in the CFL, and we'll see what he thinks about that. All kinds of other stuff. I imagine he'll want to talk about his lame-ass hockey team. We'll see if there's time. That'll be Chris Hoffley on Friday. That's where we'll wrap this one up. For Steve McLean, my name is Matt Robinson. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you Friday.
I thought it generally sucked. I didn't think it was a specific suck. I thought it was like an all-encompassing type of suck. So, we're going to try and rectify that. But for right now, I'm going to be pretty pissed about it.